You know what actually killed most pirates? Not sword fights in a blaze of glory, not the hangman's noose dangling on some Caribbean dock, not even scurvy though it tried its best to rot them from the inside out. No, the real killer was far more ordinary, yet infinitely more terrifying. It was food, or more precisely, the grotesque things men convinced themselves were food, when the only alternative was death by starvation at sea. Think about the images we carry from movies and storybooks. Pirates feasting on roasted pigs, tearing into tropical fruits, passing jugs of rum around blazing bonfires. A romantic tableau of reckless freedom. But here's the truth. An actual pirate would have slit a man's throat for a fresh apple. They would have traded chests of Spanish gold for a single cask of clean water that didn't taste like rot. That rowdy, drunken pirate image. They weren't drinking for pleasure. They drank because their water was poison, and alcohol was the only thing that made it bearable. Picture this. It's 1720, and you're aboard a British naval ship. If you're an officer, your table tonight might hold roast duck glazed with onion sauce, a loaf of warm bread, maybe preserved fruits shipped from Europe, and a decent wine to wash it all down. Meanwhile, below deck, the common sailors gnaw on rock-hard biscuits, crawling with weevils, and choke down salted beef so desiccated and brined it could outlast a corpse. You eat not for pleasure, but to silence the hollow ache in your belly. Now shift that image to a pirate ship. Here, things worked differently. Officers and captains didn't dine apart. They didn't hoard delicacies while their crew suffered. When Bartholomew Roberts, one of the most successful pirate captains in history, sat to eat, he scooped from the same cauldron of salmagundi stew as the newest recruit. Everyone shared the same misery, spoon for spoon. This wasn't an act of kindness. It was survival by solidarity. Pirates understood something navies and kings never grasped. When everyone suffers together, bonds form stronger than chains or gold. If the captain is picking weevils out of his biscuit alongside you, if his gums bleed from scurvy, as yours do, then you'll follow him into hell, not because he commands it, but because you know he endures the same torment. And yet, the grim equality didn't erase the misery. Imagine yourself biting into a ship's biscuit, so hard it could break teeth, so infested you pray the crunch you hear is flour, not larvae. Salted pork reeking of rot, fish long past rancid, meat so tough you boil it for hours and still chew until your jaw aches. Even rats seemed a delicacy compared to that. There's a cruel irony here. The golden age of piracy coincided with Europe's great age of sail, a time when empires expanded across oceans, trade routes pulsed with wealth, and scientific curiosity reshaped the world. And yet, the men at the heart of that age, the ones who risked their lives daily faced death, not from enemy cannon, but from their very rations. The ocean offered no mercy. Hunger gnawed at discipline. Rotten water mocked thirst. And food became a symbol of both despair and democracy. Pirates were not only fighting kings and navies, they were fighting the slow, invisible, relentless tyranny of their own stomachs. In the rigid world of naval warfare, hierarchy was carved into every detail, even down to the crumbs on a sailor's plate. Officers feasted in their private cabins, their silver cutlery glinting under lamplight as they carved roasted meats and dipped bread into steaming sauces. Below them, in the damp belly of the ship, common sailors sat hunched over bowls of brine-soaked beef and biscuits hard enough to shatter teeth. The message was unspoken but undeniable. Rank determined not just authority, but survival itself. On a pirate vessel, however, the story shifted in ways almost revolutionary. When a man signed pirate articles, the written code every crew swore to uphold, he wasn't just promising loyalty in plunder or courage in battle. Hidden among the rules about dividing treasure and punishing theft was a radical line. Every man has equal title to the fresh provisions or strong liquors at any time seized. Think about what that meant. Food was not a privilege of rank, but a common right. Every pirate, from the seasoned gunner to the greenest deckhand, dipped his ladle into the same pot. The captain's portion was no larger, no finer, no cleaner than that of the newest recruit. When they seized a ship laden with wine or citrus, the spoils were divided equally, not with gold, but with food and drink. It wasn't generosity, it was necessity, and pirates understood necessity better than anyone. A starving crew couldn't fight, couldn't sail, couldn't plunder. Sharing food meant sharing life itself. Misery, when divided equally, bound them closer than chains ever could. This fragile democracy extended beyond mealtimes. Hoarding food was among the worst crimes a pirate could commit. Worse, in fact, than stealing gold from the common chest. Why? Because stolen treasure could be replaced with the next raid, but stolen provisions threatened the survival of all. Pirate codes often prescribed brutal punishments for hoarding rations, marooning a man alone on a deserted island with only a pistol, one shot, and a flask of water. A symbolic sentence: you took from the crew, now survive without them. Here lies the strange beauty of pirate life. While kings and admirals clung to hierarchy, pirates built loyalty through equality in deprivation. The Royal Navy believed obedience came from lash and rank. Pirates believed obedience came from sharing the same mouldy bread. And in that twisted arithmetic, they discovered something profound. People will endure almost anything if they know their leaders endure it too. In a way, the pirate table was a rough draft of democracy. Not the democracy of speeches and ballots, but of salt meat and weevil biscuits. A recognition that survival was only possible if everyone captain or cabin boy suffered together. It wasn't idealism that united them. It was hunger. And so, the pirate's daily meal became more than sustenance. It was ritual. It was contract. It was proof that, in this one small corner of the brutal ocean, equality could be tasted, spoonful by spoonful. If hunger gnawed at pirates day by day, thirst stalked them hour by hour. Fresh water was both the most precious and the most treacherous thing aboard a ship. Stored in wooden barrels, sealed and stacked in the sweltering Caribbean heat, it began clear and pure. But weeks at sea transformed it into something far more sinister. Open a barrel after a month, and the crew would recoil. What had once been clean water was now a thick, greenish soup. Algae writhed inside, bacteria bloomed unseen, and the stench rolled out like a living thing. Pirates called it living water, because you could actually see organisms swimming in it. Imagine lowering a cup into that sludge, watching tiny creatures drift across the surface, and knowing you had no choice but to drink. The smell alone could turn your stomach, a fetid cocktail of rotting eggs, stagnant swamp, and death itself. And yet, they drank it, because the only alternative was dying of thirst under a merciless sun. This was the cruel puzzle of seafaring life. The ocean stretched endlessly in every direction, a world made entirely of water, yet none of it drinkable. Salt water mocked the men who stared at it daily, whispering death through parched lips. To swallow it was to invite madness and a quick, shriveled death. And so they clung to their rotting barrels, gagging down poison disguised as salvation. Here's where alcohol, rum, wine, beer became not luxury, but lifeline. Fermentation killed most harmful bacteria and prevented new infestations. Unlike water, rum never spoiled. Pirates didn't swig rum because they were carefree drunkards. They swigged it because it was safer than water. To them, a cask of rum was medicine, preservation, even purification. Of course, they couldn't drink rum neat all day. A perpetually drunk crew was a dead crew. Ships needed hands sober enough to man sails, to spot reefs, to fire cannons. And so, the pirates improvised. They mixed their rum with the very poison it was meant to save them from, the foul, fetid water. The mixture diluted the rum enough to keep them functional, and the alcohol was just strong enough to kill, or at least weaken, the worst of the living things writhing inside those barrels. It was an accidental chemistry, discovered not by theory, but by desperation. Men who had never heard of bacteria had nonetheless invented a crude form of water purification. A thin line of survival, balanced on the rim of a wooden cup. From desperation came invention. The pirates' foul mixture of rum and water soon took on a name that would echo through centuries of seafaring. Grog. 1 part rum, 4 parts water, sometimes brightened with a squeeze of lime if fortune allowed, or sweetened with a spoonful of stolen sugar. Spices, nutmeg, cinnamon, ginger, when they could be pilfered from merchant holds, transformed it from a punishment into something almost palatable. It wasn't about taste, it was about survival. The alcohol made the rotting water drinkable, and the water kept the men sober enough to fight. In its crude, accidental chemistry, grog was a miracle. It turned filth into fuel. But on a pirate ship, grog was more than chemistry. It was culture. Twice a day, at noon and sunset, the ritual began. The cook or quartermaster measured carefully, pouring each man's ration with a precision that could mean life or death. Pirates lined up, tin cups in hand, waiting their turn. No man dared cut the line, no man dared take more than his share. Grog was a quality made liquid. Break the rules, though, and grog became punishment. A man caught stealing might see his ration cut, a punishment far crueler than the whip. Good behaviour, on the other hand, could earn an extra measure, a prize worth more than coins. Control the grog, and you controlled the crew, not by fear, but by thirst. Even the Royal Navy took notice. By the mid-18th century, they adopted grog as standard ration, long after pirates had pioneered it. But where the Navy saw it as discipline, pirates lived it as democracy. The captain drank from the same barrel as the lowest deckhand. Everyone's throat burned equally with that foul, diluted mix. There's a strange beauty in the image. Rough men, hardened by hunger and battle, raising their cups together in unison, not to toast victory or gold, but to drink away the taste of death that floated in every barrel of water. Grog was their shield, their comfort, their shared ritual against a hostile sea. And yet, beyond the ritual, there lingered a dark truth. For all its power to sustain, grog was only a mask. Beneath the warmth of rum and the bitter tang of lime, the same hunger, the same thirst, the same fragile mortality waited. Pirates knew this, and still, they drank, because drinking together meant surviving together. No tale captures the desperation of pirate hunger better than Henry Morgan's march to Panama in 1671. It was supposed to be a triumph. Morgan, already flushed with victory after sacking Portobello, led 1,200 buccaneers across the Isthmus of Panama to strike the rich Spanish city on the Pacific coast. By his calculations, it should have taken only a few days. Instead, it became one of the most horrifying ordeals in the history of piracy. The Spanish, warned of Morgan's approach, had scorched the land before him. Villages were burned, fields torched, wells poisoned, livestock driven deep into the forests. Morgan's men walked into a wasteland. By the third day, their supplies were gone. By the fifth, their hunger clawed at them so mercilessly that they turned to their own leather gear for food. Belts, satchels, even shoes were cut into strips. First soaked in water to soften them, then beaten with stones to break down the fibres. Hair was scraped off, and finally the leather was roasted over fire. What emerged was blackened, barely chewable, yet the men forced it down. Some swore that, after long preparation, the leather became as soft as boiled beef. More likely, starvation had twisted their senses into cruel illusions. But leather was only the beginning. On the seventh day, the marchers stumbled into an abandoned village where a few stray dogs had been left behind. What followed was less a meal than a frenzy. Hardened buccaneers, men who had fought side by side in battle, fell upon the animals like wolves. They did not just eat them, they fought each other for the scraps. Blood was drunk straight from veins. Bones were boiled for hours to extract meager broth. Men cracked paws and gnawed at them desperately, trying to suck some phantom of nourishment from between the toe pads. When dogs were gone, rats became treasure. Pirates who once sneered at vermin now paid silver for a fat ship rat, skewered it on a ramrod, and roasted it like game. Veterans even claimed rat meat was delicate, sweet, as good as rabbit. Perhaps it was true, or perhaps, again, hunger makes liars of us all. The march stretched 9 brutal days. By the time Morgan's army finally found cattle, the men were broken shadows of themselves. They slaughtered beasts in a frenzy, feasting in blood-soaked relief that saved their lives, but left scars on their souls. For many, the taste of boiled leather and dog meat never left them. Some confessed in later years that hunger had transformed them into something less than human. This is the real pirate story, less about gold and glory, more about the line hunger draws between man and animal. On Morgan's march, that line blurred, then vanished. The brotherhood of buccaneers turned into a pack of starving beasts. Survival demanded it, but the memory of that descent haunted them far longer than any battle. If starvation was sudden and savage, scurvy was its opposite, a slow, patient unraveling of the human body. To the pirates, it seemed like a curse from the sea itself, and in truth, it was far crueler than any cannon fire. It began subtly. A sailor might feel more tired than usual, his joints aching, his energy drained. At first, he brushed it off. Months at sea wore everyone down. But then, the signs grew darker. Purple spots bloomed on arms and legs without cause. Old scars split open and bled anew, as if wounds from years past had never healed. The gums turned black and spongy, swelling grotesquely until teeth loosened and dropped one by one. The stench of rot leaked from a man's mouth before death ever came. Then came the bleeding. Skin that tore at the slightest touch. Bones that suddenly snapped where fractures had healed long ago. Blood filling the lungs until a man coughed red into his hands. And through it all, he stayed conscious, fully aware as his body betrayed him piece by piece. The cruelest twist? The cure was everywhere. Citrus fruit slimes, lemons, oranges, grew wild across the very islands pirates sailed past. The Caribbean was a floating orchard of salvation. But in the 17th century, no one understood vitamins, let alone vitamin C. The true cause of scurvy would not be discovered until James Linn's experiments in 1747, decades after the so-called Golden Age of piracy had faded into legend. Instead, pirates relied on superstition and guesswork. Some believed scurvy came from bad air trapped below decks. Others blamed the endless salted meat. A few thought it was divine punishment for wickedness. They tried remedies that bordered on torture, bloodletting, which only weakened the already frail, purging with mercury, which poisoned them further, herbal concoctions that induced vomiting but cured nothing. Occasionally, luck saved them. After raiding coastal villages, pirates would gorge themselves on fresh fruit, unknowingly buying a few weeks of health. During careening stops on tropical islands, they might feast on citrus, delaying the disease. But once back at sea, the clock began ticking again. A body carries about 3 months of vitamin C. After that, time runs out. The arithmetic was merciless. Most pirate voyages lasted longer than 3 months. And so, ship after ship found itself haunted by the same fate. Crews wasting away, men too weak to climb rigging, too broken to man cannons, sometimes too feeble even to bury their dead. Captains faced impossible decisions. Risk anchoring for provisions and expose the crew to capture, or keep sailing and watch half the men rot alive. Scurvy destroyed not only bodies but bonds. To see a shipmate dissolve into a shadow, teeth gone, flesh splitting, lungs drowning in blood, it stripped away any romance of piracy. Surviving scurvy left scars that never healed. Lost teeth, brittle bones, chronic weakness. Many who endured it lived in terror of its return. Some even hoarded citrus in secret, clutching rotten limes in their hammocks like talismans against death. This was the true face of piracy. Not roaring battles or buried treasure, but men staring into their mugs of grog, wondering if their gums would bleed tomorrow. Not the freedom of the seas, but the slavery of a body collapsing from within. The world remembers pirates as men who escaped tyranny. They defied kings, mutinied against captains, rejected empires. They sailed under black flags that promised no master but themselves. But in truth, their rebellion only traded one tyranny for another less visible, but far more merciless. They rejected the lash of naval officers, only to submit to the lash of hunger. They escaped the gallows of empire, only to hang beneath the invisible rope of disease. Their bodies became their prisons, their stomachs, their jailers, their own thirst, their executioner. This was the pirate's devil's bargain. Freedom in theory, slavery in reality. They could vote for captains, divide plunder equally, chart their own course. Yet, those same freedoms left them exposed to the cruelties of nature, unprotected by the systems that, however harsh at least, shielded naval crews with supply chains and medical surgeons. Think of it this way. The Royal Navy sailor had no voice, but he had rations, a surgeon's chest, the weight of empire behind him. A pirate had a voice, a vote, a share of plunder, and the chance to starve on a barren island, to drink water that burned his throat, to rot from scurvy with no one to help him. And yet, strangely, many chose piracy anyway. Why? Perhaps because equality in suffering felt more dignified than inequality in comfort. To share misery with brothers was preferable to watching officers dine while you choked on weevils. To die free, even of thirst, seemed better than to live shackled under a king. It is here that the paradox of piracy comes into focus. Their freedom was not gilded, it was ragged, blood-stained, half-starved. But it was theirs. They chose it, even knowing the price. And in that choice, there is a dark kind of nobility. Pirates built a society not of treasure, but of endurance. Not of glory, but of grim acceptance. They knew they would likely die not in battle, but in silence, starving, bleeding, forgotten. And still, they raised the black flag. Still, they sailed. Still, they drank grog together at sunset, choosing shared misery over enforced obedience. That is the essence of the pirate's world. A freedom so raw it bordered on ruin. A democracy so fragile it was built on rot and rum. They bartered their lives not for gold, but for the right to decide how they would lose them. So what remains of the pirate life, stripped of its myths? Not the glittering treasure chests, not the endless feasts, not the drunken revels under palm trees. What remains are the scraps of survival, the rituals forged in desperation, the brotherhood born in equal misery. And yet, from this misery came an unlikely legacy. Pirates carried foodways across oceans, often without knowing it. Barbecue. The slow smoking of meat over wood was borrowed from the indigenous peoples of the Caribbean and carried into the wider world through pirate journals. Guacamole, first tasted in raids on Spanish colonies, spread westward through the very men who once starved on leather and rats. Even the word tortilla entered English through Buccaneers' records. In their endless hunt for sustenance, these outlaws became accidental ambassadors of global cuisine. There's irony in that. Men who gnawed on rancid biscuits and boiled boots left behind recipes that still fill our tables centuries later. The very same pirates who once prayed for a piece of citrus to stave off scurvy now stand at the roots of the foods we consider everyday pleasures. But beyond cuisine, the deeper truth is darker, stranger, more human. Pirates remind us that freedom is not always glorious. It is often brutal. That equality may come not from noble ideals, but from necessity. That survival, in its rawest form, combined men tighter than gold ever could. Imagine it once more. The deck at sunset, the horizon burning red, the sea endless in every direction. A line of men, cups in hand, waiting for their ration of grog. They drink together, captain and recruit, veteran and boy, sharing the same bitter mouthfuls, the same hunger in their bellies, the same sickness lurking in their gums. They laugh, curse, spit, and for a moment, they are not starving, not dying. They are brothers. This is the real pirate story. Not treasure maps or ghostly curses, but the quiet dignity of men who found democracy in rotting meat, solidarity in poisoned water, and humanity in the darkest corners of survival. Hollywood will never show you that. But perhaps, in its own way, it's a story far more extraordinary than any hunt for buried gold. Because it is not about wealth, it is about endurance. Not about fantasy, but about truth. And truth, however grim, has a power no myth can match.